All right, Max, what are we reviewing today? Today, we got The Legend of Auntie Po. This is by Shing Khor, I think. Apologies again anytime I mispronounce anything. Um, it's a fun story. It's set in the U.S., specifically Sierra Nevada, in the 1800s, late 1800s, in a logging camp. A lot of the book really dives into the dangerous nature of logging, and kind of some of the specific mechanics and how to do it. You get you get basically the story of a particular Chinese family and this broader Chinese community working at this logging company, and then the other white people, and particularly this white foreman who is, I think, trying his best to help some of these Chinese workers, and in particular the core family of Mai here, who's the main character. But this is happening during this time of this Chinese Exclusion Act, where like basically they were trying to force Chinese people out of work, excluding them from work. And so there's like these natural tensions that arrive both from maneuvering this racist policy, as well as just the actual challenges of the job, which are quite dangerous. And I guess the final interesting part is there's this magical character that is Auntie Po that you kind of see here. She's like this giant grandma figure and also has a blue ox, very Paul Bunyan-esque, that like is woven through the story. So that's the high level story. We can dive into then the patent pending scoring system. This is on a whiteboard today. I might start doing this more. It's actually kind of a good size, and then I don't have to keep throwing away paper. But anyway, we can start off with the characters. So some of this I really like. I've said this many times before. Like, what's a good set of characters? Like, I love me a small set of characters you can keep track of, and all are pretty distinct. This is Mai. She's smart. She's got a real passion. She's, like very close with her dad, and I always do this wrong, see here, who, is, I think, extremely good at what he does, an extremely good cook. He's like very hardworking, a very good father, and, you're introduced to him doing this like ritual of praying to a shrine for like their family, which is cool. And then so then there's other ancillary characters in the Chinese workers camp. On the other side, we have like her best friend B, who is the daughter of the foreman, who you can see here. These, I would say, are the four core characters. On the human side, the foreman is, I think, probably more interesting in just the tension of the novel, because he's like trying his very hardest to work around kind of the company's requirements, and also very pragmatic. I'll probably get into this a little bit more. And then we have Auntie Po, who starts off as a character that Mai is like telling other kids about in kind of like a redemptive way. Like, there's kind of this like magical being that could help out when times get hard, as they do. But then eventually she I'm trying to find this too. She eventually actually like meets the character like in real life, and so I'll say what I like and what I don't like. Again, the characters are distinct. I would really say it's the four main ones, and then this Auntie Po character. But you get some interesting side characters as well. Like, there's a brother, and there's like a kind of dad that is good at logging but drinks too much, and there's some like interesting, again, like other characters involved with the camp, and just the sense of the camp too. Like a big tension point is that like the Mai's dad like can't cook for a while, and so even though they know that they're not supposed to be like letting some of the workers do this stuff, they basically start like demanding help because the kind of white people they have cooking for them are so bad. So they're like, I guess the rest of the campsite and all those characters are kind of a character in themselves. I think like I just I found the characters interesting, but like their interactions were often like puzzling in a sense. Like there was maybe a little bit too much of the same dynamic over and over for me, where like it felt like one of the central struggles. I mean, obviously, this is like telling less of a historical story of the Chinese Exclusion Act, where there's like you're not gonna get like, you know, in other comic books I've reviewed, maybe they insert like comic book drawings of newspaper articles talking about this stuff, like, you know, more deliberate insertions of like how this played out in history, and then you're getting this story that sort of weaves those pieces of history in. You don't really even get it explained very much. You're just kind of like aware of it if you read the back cover, that oh, this is why they're doing this, when they have parts of the story where they're explaining why some people, you know, can't do it. But like I think that you end up getting these like natural. I guess maybe like I just was like struck where the story like really shows how much the foreman like advocates to try to help out the the Chinese workers, and in particular this family, as much as he can, um, and uh, and like bends the rules, runs away from them. I think some of the story though is just that like despite that, bad things keep happening, and I think that the tension just over and over is kind of like, you know, I think the main problem of this foreman is that he in some sense makes promises he can't keep, although pragmatically I feel like he's probably almost always doing the right decision. Like at some point it's kind of like, you know, look, the company is putting these requests from on high. I'm going to sneak people and still allow them to do this work when I can get away with it, and I'm also going to get new jobs for people that I can't employ right now, and I'll house your daughter. But like if I get fired by breaking the rules too explicitly, they'll just replace me with someone worse. And I think that's like the very pragmatic thing that plays out, but the pragmatism like ends up fraying kind of all the relationships. So you just get a lot of these like awkward standoffs where like it's either the foreman arguing with Mai's dad, or B, who's the daughter of the foreman, often arguing with Mai, and they feel like estranged because of this just like crappy situation everyone's sort of finding themselves. Um, so I think some of it was like trying to figure out, and I don't want to spoil things either, but you know, bad things happen in this book. Like the climax kind of comes about 3/4 of the way through with this like bad lumber incident when they're transporting it down a river. Um, and a lot of like I think that like maybe what I wanted a little bit more out of this was to like dwell a little bit more on like what should have been. Like it seems like there's just a lot of like ultimately reparations with some of these main characters because they've gone through painful events together. And again, this reoccurring just argument over like, you know, you said you're treating me like family and you're not, but there isn't often like a solution that's proposed, and I kind of wish I knew exactly what they wanted to happen, because I just wasn't quite sure how it should have looked. But anyway, I you know, I think also the thing that kind of dropped it for me a little bit is that like I this Auntie Poe character I think had potential to just like number one be a bit more interesting. Like I think it felt, yeah, like, you know, it's in the title. It's sort of like a Paul Bunyan-esque character, but like she doesn't actually, again, without you know, trying to spoil everything here, like I just never got the sense she actually did anything. Like I'm not sure this magical character strengthened the story. I think she's meant to stand for something, um, you know, and kind of was like used as this mechanism to create hope for kids in the camp with like this tall tale. I guess like just a little bit too muddled for me with like how the characters interacted, and I guess just even why some of them existed. Like I'm all for magic characters. I've said this many times too. I think that's, you know, what helps the X factor here be a little interesting. Like I don't know, just a magic huge grandma with a big blue cow like Paul Bunyan. Um, and like at the same time, I guess like it just never really connected with me. But anyway, so the characters like perfectly solid. I just wouldn't really come back to this story for the characters. And same for the art. I think the art is perfectly solid. Something that I'll get to the readability later is I just feel like it's incredibly readable. Like the text to pictures ratios is dang near perfect, I think. Um, it's like not my favorite style in the absolute world. Like I again, I wouldn't come back purely to read this book again because of how it looks. But I like the use of color. I think they do some, again, it's definitely like at the very worst like average or above average in terms of like other books I've reviewed. Something about it's just like maybe a little too. I just can't place. I think this is one of those weird things with books like this, or like once you start to think about how you're thinking about reviewing it, I feel like maybe I'm getting too critical about some of the aspects of this book, but like yeah, just like it's serviceable art. It just like a little too round, maybe a little too stylized, and like again, just like it's perfectly good. It's perfectly strong. You most of the time, like I only had one or two moments where like I was kind of confused which characters was which at a point, but like again, overall solid. In terms of the history culture, like I mentioned, it's a little light on like explicitly laying out what history and culture it's talking about, and for those that aren't like incredibly familiar with the Chinese Exclusion Act, like you might want to, again, like this is about that, but you might not know that immediately unless you had already learned about that thing. It's not as widely known, for instance, I think, as like the civil rights movement or something like that, where you almost don't need explaining at all for the context of a story like that. This might have needed a little tiny bit more context, but I think it does a great job at showing how these like policies were like again creating such tension between families that like truly obviously cared about each other, but like nevertheless like between a rock and a hard place. Like maybe some part of this book, if it's the goal is to like dwell in like trying to maneuver systems that are like intrinsically problematic and not necessarily having like a golden solution, like I don't know, like having to just yeah, again, like I think like it does a good idea of it just expressing how frustrating these situations must have been for these people who are already doing very threatening work. Something else I liked for the historical part is, and maybe the art style that I like better. I feel like this just looks different than some of the others. They have some very detailed parts about just like the the types of tools that they'd be using, either for cooking or for like doing logging at the beginning of I think every chapter except maybe the first chapter, that I just thought were like cool. Like again, it's something like for the X Factor score is interesting. I just hadn't seen something like this too, where like they clearly researched some of the stuff behind how people would be like falling these trees or felling these trees and then transporting them, and they did their homework, and just interesting. I ended up like really liking these diagrams, so I think that's also historical and cultural in its own sense. It's like these are the normal tools that you use, and I think they did great service to that. Readability, I probably am like, I don't even need to show many more pages. I've already shown a lot of these. You care enough about I frankly just it's an interesting mix. Like it did propel me. Like I think I read this whole book, which is like almost three, just shy of 300 pages. Maybe I read it in 2 sittings. It's like sparse enough, well laid out enough, and I think like has enough like interpersonal conflict and character develop, like characters that are interesting, that it like propels you through. Um, so like a strong score there for sure. Like this is not something that should take you multiple attempts to read through. Uh, and for the X Factor, like overall, I'm always a sucker for somebody bringing in magical elements. Like I feel like the whole magical element of Auntie Poe didn't 100% like make it for me. Like I almost like wish there was something bringing a bit more of the Chinese background rather than kind of like this Paul Bunyan-esque character. And again, like I just don't think they really influenced the plot. They were more like this, you know, symbol, and like yeah, so I guess I just I think like I like the fact that there's magic in here interweaved in a natural-ish way to the actual history and culture that they're trying to cover. Like Americans in the West doing this like lumber work with both white and Chinese Americans. I think they do a great job. As much as they can. Relatively good job blending all these things together. So solid X Factor score there as well. This brings us all the way up to a 5.8, which is a very respectable, I believe slightly above average score. I think like this would be great as like a slice of life thing for like an 1800s history class for like high school or middle school to I think couple and make like a little bit more visceral and real what this was like, and like specifically if there's chapters covering like the Chinese Exclusion Act, this is like the perfectly designed story for that. And so yeah, overall definitely would recommend, especially if you're interested in this time period and this type of law that was passed at the time. Um, Aside from that, as I've been doing my shameless plug, and if also in addition to liking graphic novels and history and culture, if you also have children or know people with children that like to read books, this is a children's book I have self-published. It's on Amazon. I'll leave the link here. And yeah, appreciate any support if you see it for the two people watching this. Anyway, till next time.